Welcome to the Hidden World of Women, a podcast brought to you by Women's Health and Wellbeing Services. My name is Emma and I'll be your host for today's episode. Today I'm joined by an absolutely amazing woman. Pip she's an independent lived experience advocate. She's an advocate for all things women's health. She's an author. She's a wife, a mother and a stepmom. She's a lover of travel and cooking, and she loves placemaking and making changes at the grassroots level in her community. So thank you so much for joining me today, Pip.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
So I did say that you love travel and you are joining me. So instead of joining me from sort of down, well, it would be a long road, you're joining me from the other side of the world today.
Indeed. I'm tuning in from Paris.
I'm so jealous.
It is incredibly beautiful here.
Yeah, we've got some sunshine, but it's not the same as being in Paris, is it?
There's sunshine in Paris too. Yeah. It's actually beautiful weather.
Lovely. So this is our 50th episode for the podcast, and because it is 50, I put a call out to ask people for some suggestions for what we should do for our 50th episode. And somebody suggested that we should cover what it's like to turn 50. So we've also just celebrated our second birthday for the podcast. So I'm super excited by that. We should be up to 52 episodes, but a couple got missed. And one of the reasons that I asked you to be a guest on this is I remember talking to you just after your 50th birthday and you telling me how liberating it was to turn 50.
It was incredible. I always remember the day I turned 40 and my mother rang me and she said, "Happy birthday, darling. 50 is so much better." And when I got there, I thought, she is so right.
So as someone who's just turned 40, always nice to know that, you know, we're still heading in the right direction.
Definitely. It's interesting. I am a little bit fascinated about that 7-year age cycle. So 49 is the seventh 7-year cycle, if you see what I mean. And yeah. I certainly found that year to be, you know, if not now, when. So I self-published my memoir when I turned 49. It was just like, I have got to get this book out into the world. I've been working on it for about 11 years. By the time
Can't rush these things.
I self-published it. Can't rush art. And it was just one of those things where there's something about 50 that felt like, you know, the permission. You've just got to get on with it. And I know Brene Brown talks about that, like, you know, the world is saying to you, come on, we're not dicking around here. You've got to do this.
That's
and
it.
So there's something about that incredible push as you come up to 50. I guess for me, there was something about backing myself and almost having like a permission slip. And it's like, here I go. I certainly too, for me, self-publishing a book meant that I crossed the line and I outed myself. I am an author. And once you are out, you can't go back. And that's been a really important thing for me personally.
And it takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there.
Yes, writing is a bit like that. And yes, because when it's written, it's no longer yours and things change. Although I feel very happy with that first book. The second book has taken a very long time as well. I'm hoping as I'm actually nearing I just turned 57, so I'm getting closer to being 60, and I'm just thinking, I'm really hoping my writing will speed up.
Well, it took 11 years for the first one. If you can get it in under 11, it's getting faster. But
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, we might need to work on some processes somewhere, I think.
Indeed.
But I guess when I was growing up, this idea of people aging, there never seemed to be the same kind of pressure around men's ages. But, you know, growing up, I had friend's mum, so one particular friend's mum who, when she turned 40, she went to bed for a week and just wouldn't speak to anybody, she wouldn't leave her bedroom, let alone leave the house. And then other people who, when they turned 50, it was like, that's it. It's all downhill from here. And that kind of that real pressure point that come with those milestone birthdays.
It's a really interesting one, and I have often reflected on what my mother had said to me when I turned 40 about how wonderful 50 was. And on reflection for her, one of the things that was so wonderful is the children get to a stage where they are much more launched into the world. And for a woman, you actually have room and space for things for yourself. And that just gets broader and broader and broader the older the children get. And I guess I think we really underestimate the transition of when our children become adults.
Yeah.
It's a massive, massive transition. I think, like all these things, those transitions can really vary. Like my daughter is half Greek, not my half, and there's this saying. There's many Greek sayings, but there's that Greek saying, little children, little problems, big children, big problems. Yeah. But when things have gone okay with your kids, when they become adults, and you start to develop that adult relationship, it's just magnificent. And I think we don't talk about adult parenting enough. We just assume that it's all about when they're under 18. But I mean, I think about my own dear mother is still going at 95. So most of her and my relationship, we've both been adults. And it's been a very rich and rewarding and special relationship. And I just think, these are the sorts of fruits that the 50s are all about, is the adult relationships. It's the like once you have children, your life runs on two tracks. What's happening for them, what's happening for you. But that second track sort of disappears off, and so it just becomes one track. What am I doing? What am I here to do? What am I here to do? Let's get on with it. And there's that permission, let's get on with it moment that I guess I personally find to be really exciting.
It's interesting that you bring that up. I suppose I'm sort of at that junction point now with my eldest child. I'm going to be honest, I'm struggling with it. I'm struggling with the transition from me knowing where she is all the time, me being the person that takes her where she needs to go, being involved, knowing her friends' parents, all of that kind of stuff, to now she's off, she's at uni, she's doing her thing, fingers crossed I've raised her in the best way that I possibly can, and she's making sensible decisions, but I'm not part of those decisions. And that isn't talked about much either. That, so I guess, by the time I'm hitting 50, my kids will, they'll be off in the world. But there are lots of parents now who I would say by the time their kids are hitting 50, they may have 10-year-olds.
That's true. That is very true. But I mean, even a 10-year-old, your life does open up a little bit more.
Well, yes, it does, but not in the same way that it does with a 28-year-old. So.
No. When my mum was 50, I was only 10 because she was 40 when she had me.
Yeah.
But it's just that her life is still a lot freer. She was a bit extravagant, had 6 children in 8 years. So. I know. Yeah. So obviously, by the time the youngest was 10, your life starts to open up a lot more.
Yeah.
I think too, it can be, so I know it's not always the case, but it can be that perhaps financially things are doing okay. And I think also there's that experience behind you. Like, I just remember around about this period of time, I just had this thing, back yourself, because I don't know, women often question themselves and so forth, but when you can feel yourself backing yourself, and you have that experience behind you, it just allows for you to move into the world a little more, and I guess do what the sorts of things that you and I really love to do, which is to speak up for women, to speak up for women's health, and to advocate. And you've got that. It's a power of that experience.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we're still living in a culture where we don't see women aging. So we don't see women aging on television, and we've probably got a couple of newsreaders that are still around despite the fact that they're no longer in their 20s or 30s. But predominantly we're not representing older generations of women, and yet for your experience, you're saying that when you got to that age of 50, that felt like you hit your power and you were grabbing hold of it.
That's true. And what's interesting to me is I was dyeing my hair. And I recently, this year, as mentioned already, it's my 57th year, and I took the decision to, like many people in COVID, I decided I would resign from my position to see if I could have a little bit more time for writing and other pursuits. And it was a very big and complex decision for me. and I wanted to have something external to show that transition. So I quit dyeing my hair. And as it turns out, my hair is completely silver. And I've had people say to me, "Oh my God, your hair looks amazing. Your haircut is fantastic." It's literally the same haircut. Yeah. 15 years, same hairdresser, Bonchell Hair and Beauty in Coolbellup, if anyone would love to give a shout out to my hairdresser. But it's exactly the same, but it's me now.
Yeah.
And what interests me too is I have had women say to me, to my contemporaries say to me, "I'm not ready to do that yet." And sometimes they talk about concerns about employability.
Yeah.
If they have grey hair. So it's funny because I feel much more employable now than when my hair was dyed. It could just be an illusion. I don't know. Well, but there's something about being able to be myself.
Yeah.
That is, again, really empowering.
I think that there's a couple of things there. One, so I have just recently had fluorescent pink hair for a significant period of time, and I'm just in the process of stripping it out. But with that, there's this: you can't be a professional woman with fluorescent pink hair. And my argument is, well, it's what's in my head that makes me that's what got me this position, not what's on my head. So it really doesn't matter what color my hair is. But yeah, there's that kind of thing about the employability about people who have fluoro pink hair or whatever that might be. There's the authenticity. There's also, as somebody who employs only women in their 50s are generally not in that. They're not likely to go off and go on maternity leave. They're not likely to have small children at home and need to have time off. They are my ideal people to be employing. So, women in their 50s, come at me.
So absolutely.
Yeah, it's really interesting that other people feel like being in their 50s means, and I hear it a lot, "Oh, well, you wouldn't hire somebody who was in their 50s or 60s. Yeah, I would. If you can still do the job when you're 95, I'll employ you. But just this idea that, oh, well, once you're in that job, you can't change because I'm 50 now and I won't be able to get another job.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm curious to know what because the COVID market is a really different market. And I wanted to circle back to what you said too about the pink hair, because I feel, again, like women in roles like ours, when we are not-for-profit professionals, I kind of feel like the pink hair is important. I mean, I quite like my loud pants. I think loud pants are quite important. So whilst I may have grey as opposed to pink hair, I have very loud.
Still got the loud pants.
Pants that I wear, and there's something about that, perhaps more informal, more down to earth thing that, again, I feel is really important in the not-for-profit sector. But maybe that's me. I don't like it too corporatized. But then again, as a lived experience sort of independent consultant, that it really is about, we're here to be real, not to be schmick.
And that's exactly it. I think judge me on what I've done, judge me on what I can do, not on my appearance, because when you get me, you get me. And so you get me, sometimes you get me with no makeup and bags under my eyes and my hair's in a messy bun and, if I'm lucky, and you get me in, whatever that might be. And other times I might actually get up 10 minutes earlier and manage to put makeup on. It's very, very rare you're going to get that version of me. But it doesn't matter what the outside looks like, because you're going to get me. And that's big hand gestures, it's inappropriate stories, it's going off on tangents, but there's some solid substance under there rather than nothing in a power suit.
Yes. And I think there's something, that key thing that we're talking about, which I think is that authenticity. Mm-hmm. So what you're doing and your values are really aligned. And I don't know, there's such a great freedom in that. That's what I guess I have always found.
Yeah. And, I remember in the meeting that we were at, and when you said, we generally try not to swear, but anyway, I'm going to make an exception. I think the words were something along the lines of, I realised when I turned 50, I've got 0 fucks left to give. There's no, it's not about what anybody else thinks anymore. Now I just get to be me. And I was not far off 30, at the time, and going, God, do I have to wait until I'm 50? And he went, no.
Definitely not. The sooner the better.
That's it. Yeah. So I'm hoping it still gets better, and by 50 I'll have nailed it. But Yeah, that kind of idea that why is it that we put so much power in other people's hands around how we worry about how we're perceived by those people?
Exactly. I mean, I am a huge Brene Brown fan, so
Me too.
I feel like I quote her quite a lot. But I feel like, some of her insights around judgments of other people on what you're doing. And she says it's really important for you to think about who those people are that you really respect.
Yeah.
And that will give you a useful, rounded, professional, and perhaps not too partial, so not necessarily the person that loves you the most, but people who you would really rate their opinion. And she said usually it's going to be, at tops it'll be 3 people, and anyone else, honestly, it doesn't really matter. And it's like all of these things, you can get used to anything. Like you can get used to public speaking, you can get used to feeling people's disapprobation, and you just think, okay, they don't like me, I'm not their flavour.
Yeah.
And there's so much freedom in that. And that's, I think, I suppose there's so many different things where women are constrained, not supposed, it's all about your looks and all that sort of thing. But I guess I feel like we do need to understand the paradigm we're in, but we don't have to accept it, and we can subvert it.
Yeah.
I always say that I'm about a compassionate disruption of the status quo. And I think it's important to be compassionate, but it's also important to disrupt the status quo, in my humble opinion.
100%. And often, society says this, you get where society, right? So if we don't like what society's saying, we get to be part of that change, and we get to say, well, I don't want to say that anymore. And so actually this aligns with my values more, and this is the way that I'm going to interact. This is the way I'm going to support other women who are finding their own space and finding their own power. And so I get to change this part of society, and there's a ripple effect from that.
Definitely, 100%.
So how do we make it so that women who are in their 50s and beyond are more visible in our society?
What a good question, because, I sometimes feel like with my silver hair, I think sometimes people look past me more than they used to, possibly not, because we are where we are. I think, though, sometimes I think it's a really bad idea definitely a really bad idea to watch too much news, and to definitely social media isn't a great use of our time for all sorts of reasons. And I think that, we can potentially go, I'm invisible, I'm unemployable, and buy into that. Or you can just go, no, not buying into that. And I think it's all, I think there's so many different things for what, how we can, I guess, rise up. I mean, I feel like, for example, you look at movements like, is it Nanas for the Forests? There's an older group of women who are doing environmental campaigning. And I think, that kind of stuff is really powerful. Like, things are bad when
Nanas are standing up.
No, that's not okay.
Yeah.
I do believe in that whole baby boomer thing is moving through, and it is changing things as it goes. Like, I think, for example, I do think that, obviously I would at this stage of life, 60 is a new 40. If I think about my mother at 40, she seemed a lot older than I seem at 57. And same with my grandmother, much more so. So we are definitely claiming, I guess, a more I don't know, empowered and youthful, or whatever way of we're doing what we want to do. I think that it's just really making me think, because I'm just thinking, yes, we can do things individually, but maybe we need to start a movement. Maybe we need to do more around this, because I think there's something about, I guess, collectively just saying, this is such an important time of life. I mean, I haven't really talked about it yet, but there's something about menopause which I find, me personally, and I know everybody's so different, but I find, again, incredibly liberating. Like, I remember the very first time I came to Europe was 1979. I was 14 years old. And of course, I didn't really know anything at all. I was so green, this little Perth girl. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have to take a whole suitcase of sanitary wear, because, I didn't sort of think that maybe
you
they would
buy that somewhere else.
Wear in the UK. And I remember that was such a big thing. And I've had, other trips, like some periods of time when perimenopausal, when I would sometimes have flooding, and like just such a pain. And like, yeah, I'm just like, not even an issue. Don't even have to think about it. So it's that incredible lightness. And every now and then I think about it and think, yeah, I don't even have to think and worry about that at all.
Yeah.
So it releases a certain amount of energy around that. But yeah, I mean, that really gets me thinking though so much around, I know that some women really struggle with menopause. I remember listening to this really interesting podcast, an author, and I'm sorry I don't have her name on the top of my fingers at the moment, but she talked about how at one point people thought that menopause lasted a year because that was how long the only study.
Yeah, 100%. I read that really recently because we're getting ready to do a couple of episodes on menopause, and I was just reading that there'd only been one study. It only lasted a year, and I think there were 16 participants in it or something like that. So, based on those 16 participants for a year, that's all there was.
That was all there is.
Yeah.
So there's a lot there, I think, to discover. And I think, like, I suppose for me, I'm very passionate about, I suppose at heart, I'm always a women's health advocate. And again, I think it gets back to a lot of those things around informed choices. Yeah. And there's a few really key informed choice points for women. I went along to Women's Health, Barefaced Stories. It was a really amazing night, and so women were talking about things like endometriosis. They were talking about, having babies, very premature.
Yeah.
There was a really rare condition. One woman shared her H-mole pregnancy, which essentially becomes like a cancer, and her journey to becoming a mother after, which was, very uplifting. But, there was a range of different things, and so, for example, what can happen early in a woman's life when she begins her period and she has that terrible pain, and it's just, oh, well, it's a period. What do you expect? No, that's not what you expect. So I think that slowly is coming. And then, of course, birth choices, which is what I presented and talked about, was one of my great passions, is women being at choice with what they choose then, and how that can then impact on a range of different things. But then, of course, I've got my perimenopause story where I was advised to have an endometrial ablation, which is basically when they get rid of the endometrium to help with the flooding, because I was flooding and low iron. Low iron. And what happens is the system wants you to have a hysterectomy.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas an endometrial ablation is such a non-invasive. It's only for women who are no longer going to have a family, but it's literally it's not surgery in the sense of there's no site, that they don't have to cut you or anything like that. And at worst, you'll get a little bit of cramping the next day. Whereas we know a hysterectomy is a massive 6-week process of healing. Plus, you've got the issues of potential prolapse.
Yeah.
And of course, then that's going to lead me on to my other issue, which is which starts at birth and goes all the way through there, which is what can happen then. Women may have ended up, with mesh implants that they may not have known about, and there may have been other things like physiotherapy or endometrial ablations or other things. So for me, there's a range of empowered choices for women that need to be somehow championed, for people to know about. I think there's such enormous gaps in knowledge, and people think, oh, I don't really want to talk about that. And it's so important. So these choices really impact our day-to-day life.
I was talking to somebody last week actually who has a prolapse, and that's just normal. And no, it's a normal thing. It does happen, it occurs, but you don't have to live with that. And so through the course of that conversation, she was going, yes, but when you're raising children, who's got time to look after something like that? Surely, you've been suffering with this, and she was suffering with it. Surely there's got to be something we can do to shift the priority so that you didn't have to wait until your children had all left home before you could consider looking after yourself in this way. So, and I remember when I first started work, I think I'd got one baby and another one on the way. And my boss at the time said to me, don't try and be Superwoman, because what it does is it sets a bar that other people feel that that's normal, that you've got to live up to. And it does, as women, where everybody comes first and you've got to manage everything and you've got to hold everything. But at sometimes you've got to step back and actually look after yourself as well. And I often try and say to people, if you're not looking after yourself, what happens if you're not here to look after everybody else? Like, take the time. It's not selfish. You're actually putting your family first by looking after yourself. But it's not the messages that we're used to hearing, is it?
No, it's really not. And I think, I do feel like self-care can seem like a really radical act. And yet it's extra important. People, get the idea of, the aeroplane, you put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you put it on your kid. But I think it can be really, really difficult for people for women to live that. And obviously women are encouraged to be, attractive, and they're encouraged to be quiet, and they're encouraged to be carers. Up until really the last 2 or 3 generations in the Western world, I know this is Western world specific, women didn't really have the opportunity to express themselves elsewhere. And I think, it's so recent that we actually have the opportunity to express ourselves through work and careers and so forth. And what's been so difficult is that none of the other stuff has gone anywhere. So whilst men have stepped up a little bit, they haven't stepped up completely.
Yeah.
And certainly the way our society is run in Australia is raising the next generation is considered an optional extra. It's not considered absolutely at the core of what we require to thrive as a group.
Yeah.
That really pushes something really back on women a lot. And, there's a lot of complexities around that, but it gets to be that it's a really radical act if you put yourself first. But I'm a great believer in radical. And I guess, in many ways, I know I'm not really that typical of a lot of women, and I don't really know why that is. It's funny, I've partnered with someone who's not a very typical male, who doesn't really want to do the breadwinner. I don't really want to do
the housewife.
The stay-at-home thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's a really interesting, it is quite, it's actually quite radical.
Yeah.
It's very, very hard, I think, for men to say, oh, well, I don't really want to be the breadwinner. You can be the breadwinner.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's bread in the bone.
Yeah. And look, we have similar household here where, my husband, similar kind of thing, exactly. And look, it's been challenging in lots of ways, but, seeing the way that mothers fawn over him for taking the kids to school, or, oh my God, he's so amazing. He helped out in kindy. I said, you helped out in kindy? Oh, that's not the same, is it? It's exactly the same. It is literally exactly the same thing. Let's not, he's a good dad. He's a good husband. He does, not taking anything away from him, but let's not throw him a ticker tape parade for doing the exact same thing that you're doing, but he just has a different gender. And yet it's still happening. 2022, we're still celebrating men for doing things that women do every day.
Yes, parenting.
Yeah, that's it. Parenting, not babysitting your child, parenting. So, and
yes, it's a really hard one to shift, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It really is. But it's one foot in front of the other. I also heard you say that women are encouraged to be quiet, not to stand up, not to speak out in public. So,
definitely.
How do we shift that?
Oh, what a big question, hey. Sometimes I think it's about, I suppose, the saying, power is never ceded, it can only be taken. I think we do have to take our voices back. I feel often there is a lot of power in story, obviously, because for me as an advocate, I have actually prioritised writing over, doing the hard yards of running an organisation. So I'll always want to do, certain things around systemic change, but I don't want to take that commitment all the way to actually running an organisation anymore. And I guess I feel that is because stories are so powerful. And
stories bring data alive.
Yeah. What do they say? Stories are data with soul.
That's it, yeah.
And I think it's really, I think there's something around women telling stories. I met, for example, this fantastic woman it was one of those rather infuriating consultations around a women's legal policy or something. I'm like, what is this going to do apart from create another document? Because we're very, very good at creating documents as a nation.
Put on the shelf and gather dust. Yep.
the implementation bit is a real, that's across the board. Really, it's something that as advocates we have to be constantly pushing for. Show me the implementation. How are you going to report on the implementation, and so forth. But anyway, I digress. So at this particular consultation, I met this amazing woman. So she'd been doing a lot of work with young women against sexual violence. And what they've been doing is a lot of events and storytelling, like really structured, safe space around storytelling and bringing women into this, young women into this space where they can start to really find their voice. And like once you find your voice, it's a game changer. So I guess perhaps that's my answer to your question, is that we do need to find our voices. So women who have a voice, if we can help others to find their voice, great. But also find your own voice, and we've got to speak up.
Yeah,
and I often feel like, why are women not marching in the streets about some of these issues around women's health and birth choices and the care of the older woman? I just think this is so not good enough. It is not good enough.
And I think when you do find your voice, own it. So how many times have you sat around a board table and heard women say, I'm sorry, can I just say, and those are the two, they're my absolute pet peeves. I'm sorry. No, you've got nothing to be sorry for. You haven't done anything wrong. So no, I'm sorry. And can I just say, like that it cuts it off at the knees, doesn't it? Here's my thought. Yeah. This is what I'm thinking with what you're sharing at the moment. And so great that you're interjecting, but own that thought and just, share that without any need to apologise for having your own thought.
Yeah, and that takes time and that takes practice.
Yes.
It really does. Like bringing some conscious thought is really important. I certainly am sorry. So I've had to really work on, no, that's not okay. And I think too, I have had a lot of experience where I might be the only person in a room of 30 people who's not clinically trained. And so trying to bring that everyday voice into the room does require a certain amount of assumed meekness, even if it's not necessarily genuine at times. It's really interesting. I feel like, in our health system in particular, we are unfortunately caught in a bit of a paradigm of are the doctors happy? And until the doctors are happy, you can't take the first step. I do hope that that's one of those things that we do disrupt a little bit more. I personally feel like, and I know I'm going back into my favourite topic of health consumer advocacy, that I do feel as patients, patients and carers, we can feel very disempowered. But actually, once you speak up, people will go, oh, God, the consumer said this, we better do something.
Yeah.
So again, there's that collective power that we could, I think, definitely leverage more than we have so far.
So circling all the way back, when you were heading towards turning 50, did you have any trepidation about the number? Half a century, big 50, any of that kind of stuff?
I do remember 49 being a really turbulent year, and it really felt, as I say, like that energy pushing against the gate saying, if not now, when? You've got to do it. Come on, do it, girl, do it. And that for me was around owning myself as an author, and I'm sure everybody's life journey is so different. And I know it was definitely intertwined with my daughter as becoming an adult, and our, like for example, for me, the almost out of body experience when my daughter was driving me and I was a passenger. So
100%.
Going into a paper bag for the audience. There's something completely discombobulating about handing over that parental power. And that was one of those moments where it was really hard. But there's also been, I guess, so many where I've just really enjoyed it. I absolutely love, now my daughter's 24, we have to make time to catch up, and we'll go out and have some wine and olives and talk about things, and it's just absolute joy. I really do enjoy it. But to get back to your specific question around the trepidation, I don't know that I did, and maybe that's a product of all sorts of things. Like I do have parents that are a lot older than me, so that's been a great blessing in many ways, so I can see, for me, like turning 60 is really exciting, and I think I've got another 30 years of being a writer. So
Yeah.
I can definitely still do this, but as mentioned, I do need to speed up a little bit.
Yeah. Be good to get more than 3 books out, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but I think for me personally, I felt a lot of if not now, when energy. And the actual process of turning 50, it just felt like a glorious year, like the birth. Like I made sure that I celebrated it, and that was a great decision for me. And it was a really wonderful, affirming, joyous experience of turning 50. And I highly recommend that rather than hiding away from birthdays, that you have a crack at embracing them.
It's interesting that people do seem to go one of two ways, that either to hide away and just ignore it. I don't want to acknowledge it. It feels too big. It feels too overwhelming. And if I acknowledge it, then it will be real, versus I'm going to embrace it. This is something to be celebrated. So, for my 40th birthday, I think I celebrated for 3 weeks. So and spread it out for as long as possible. Yeah.
I definitely think you should spread your birthdays out over 3 weeks whenever you can. Keep that up forever.
Yeah. And I'm someone who takes my birthday off from work every year because I think I deserve it.
Absolutely. But I was thinking too, because I know you're right. Not everybody wants to have a celebration, but there are things, and again, it's about tapping into yourself.
Yeah.
What would it be for you? What would it look like for you to feel like this is I'm going to mark this in some way? For some people, it might be like I'm going to go do that art retreat that I've always wanted to do, or I'm going to, I don't know, go on that walk, do the Camino or something, something like that you don't even necessarily need to tell anyone about it, but just that we all have it. There's an urge in there somewhere, and I think it's about really. I think the transition to 50 to me, it really felt like that was a fantastic opportunity to just listen to that still small voice and give it some room.
So what did you do to celebrate your 50th?
So I had a party. Yeah, so I was trying to think what else, I feel like I became an author and went to a party. It was amazing.
How did it feel?
And I
was going to say, how did it feel? You were working on the book for 11 years. How did it feel to finally get it out there?
It was an incredible release of energy. Like it was, like when you hand in an assignment and it's it was that sort of feeling. And I do remember I did 2 book launches. I did one sort of more like an industry one with WA Council of Social Services, who I was working with at the time. And then I did one just myself at a writer's centre. And the one at the writer's centre, by the end of the event, my heart was just full. It was full. So I wouldn't say I've been able to quit my day job. I've had a lot of commercial success. I mean, that's not really, to me, that's not what really writing is about. Unfortunately, only about 4% of writers can live off writing. So for the 96% of us, it's about you do it because you have to, firstly. Plus also, it provides all these incredible opportunities. Like just at the moment, I'm on the Emerging Writers Program, which our writing centres in WA offer through funding from the Department of Culture and the Arts. And it's just an absolute game changer having a mentor there that you've got to show up to, having a range of workshops, having a group of people, we're all suffering together. It's really, it's a really incredible process. But if I wind back to when I was 49, I also, similar to now, I do believe in my 7-year cycles. I was also changing jobs, and I was actually going to start a business, but the Health Consumers Council exec director role came up, and I just knew in my heart I had to give that a crack, and I gave it 7
years,
incredible years.
And you just postponed that starting the business for 7 years, right?
Yeah, and now it's different. So now I feel like I'm calling it my menopausal gap year. So I don't really know what I'm doing. But I am having fun.
And like menopause doesn't necessarily need to just last a year. Just saying that gap year could last,
And of course, financially, I'm in a different position than I was 7 years ago. What I experienced over that 7 years was I experienced being breadwinner.
Yeah.
I actually did breadwinning for most of that 7 years. And that was a bit uncomfortable at the beginning, going, actually, this is a bit, And, I still had, like I covered all the bills and stuff, but I didn't need, like, say, to give my husband spending money. So I wasn't doing the full breadwinning, but I did the breadwinning, and it was it's a great opportunity. And if women can can take that opportunity, I'd highly recommend it. It's just a really great. It just helps to keep on resetting those age old gender stereotypes, and it's empowering.
How does it feel now to be with, I guess, insecure income and to not be the breadwinner?
Well, look, it's interesting because, you know, the COVID job market is completely different. Like,
it is.
7 years ago, it was a big risk to leave your job. You go, oh gosh, you know, you take it. Now you're kind of like, oh look, and I'm doing consultancy work at the moment, just really trying, you know, just testing it out to see if it's still a good fit. But honestly, there's just so much work. There's just so much work, and you're bored. And for me, I'm really looking to see how can I mean, my dream life would be writing and volunteering. I volunteer in my residents association. It just fills me with absolute joy. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually earn anything.
Doesn't pay the bills, sadly, does it?
And so just wanting to make sure I'm really trying to focus on getting the 2 golden writing hours in. And that doesn't sound like much, but it's got to be your 2 best hours energetically over the day.
Yeah.
So I'm still trying to get that right. And once I feel like I can get that right, I don't know, I'll see how I go. I might keep on going because I do like working. I would also just say, you know, and again, I know I'm quite privileged, but I'm in a position where I do have some, you know, some passive income, so I don't have to take any job.
Yeah.
I can be a little choosy. So I do speak from a very privileged position.
Yeah. But like you say, with the COVID job market the way that it is at the moment, there's lots to fall back on if need be.
Absolutely. It's now is a really good time, I think, to try things out. And they called it the Great COVID Resignation, and I thought, yep, I'm just part of a trend, because I just did have that feeling of like I can't keep on working like this.
Yeah.
I did also feel like as my 50s are moving through to my 60s, I feel like there's different things for different seasons. And it's like, you know, I have done a lot of work. I've worked very hard since I was 18.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, there is something around, you know, actually having more time to reflect and more time for stillness that I think I need to be looking at.
And I think that comes...
So you've been talking about 50, but I'm looking at 60, and it's looking even better.
But it comes back to that idea around self-care, doesn't it? And I think often when we talk about self-care, people get the idea that self-care is going and paying and having your nails done, or, you know, something frivolous. But I think the last 3 years have meant that doing nothing and resting is almost impossible. We're all waiting for the next major issue to drop and the next catastrophe that we need to find solutions for. So everyone's on edge. You can't relax. You can't rest. And we're doing that in a society that celebrates busyness. And so that slowing down that you're talking about, it's another societal pressure to go against, to be able to slow down and to be able to go, you know, it's okay for me to be sitting out on the swing reading a book with a cup of tea. I'm not wasting my time doing this.
And it's interesting, you know, I've been listening to you, but I've got this urge to say something around, I feel like your question sort of, you know, worrying away at me about how do we find our voice and how do we change these things. And there's something really important about being still. And I think journaling is one of those really important secret unlockers for women in particular.
Yeah.
And I would just really encourage people, if they've never journaled, to give it a crack.
I 100% agree. And for me, I find journaling is a great way to be my own expert. You know, start out, put a pen to a paper, and all of a sudden an issue that's been, so, you know, in the background that you haven't even thought about comes to the forefront. And as you're writing, the solution's in front of you. And, you know, and I think it's incredibly powerful. It's an incredibly powerful tool that we don't, I think in fact we probably mock, you know, a teenage girl with a diary. And that's, we need to reset that as well.
Yes, I've heard reflection described as a superpower, and journaling unlocks the superpower of reflection.
Yeah, most definitely. So any thoughts for people who might be listening to this, who are heading towards a big birthday, heading towards 50, and feeling like this is scary? Any thoughts for them?
I guess I would say be rebellious, don't be scared, embrace it.
And what about for the people who are looking forward to embracing it? What would you say to them?
Oh, it just gets better and better. It really does. It gets better and better. There's a lot of measures that show how life really gets richer and better the older you get.
And you spoke about journaling. Any tips or hints for how somebody who has never journaled before, or somebody that has only journaled when they were 13 with a diary with a padlock, how do you get into journaling, or how do you get back to journaling?
Look, I think there's a really fantastic book that I read, The Light Maker's Manifesto.
Yes.
So the Light Maker's Manifesto really describes, because she certainly went through that phase of, journaling herself. And I think that book is really for women who are wanting to create change, which I'm pretty sure a lot of your listeners are into. And it really has a lot of really important things to say around, self-care and basically directing your energy to the things that are most important to you. So I think that's a really good one. I don't know. It's with some trepidation, I would say The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. I think that's not necessarily for people that are writing or drawing or whatever. It's actually much more. It's actually like a 12-step process for recovering your innate creativity. And so she does this thing called morning pages, where you basically just write for, I think it's 3 pages longhand. There's certainly there's something about longhand writing that's different from typing. So if you can actually just take some time to do longhand writing, it's really worth it.
Yep. Yeah. And there is something in that book around why putting pen to paper works better than typing. But it's a long time since I read that book, so I can't remember why she...
Yeah, I think partly it's because the letters are all different shapes, whereas the key taps are all just a key tap, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So there's something a little bit different, and it's probably a little bit more analog.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think, stationery, who does not love some, come on, stationery, the best thing ever in the world.
I know. Do love me my stationery. It's nothing quite as nice as beautiful paper and a lovely pen.
Yeah, I've gone to it. My beautiful stepson gave me a calligraphy pen or a nib pen for Christmas, and it's just the best thing. I never write with anything else now.
Is it? How do you know you're a grown up? You get excited about saucepans and calligraphy pens.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Oh dear. Okay. So before we wrap up, have you got any final thoughts or anything else that you'd like to share around the idea of women aging and how we can embrace power and reclaim voices? Anything that you want to add or share?
I guess I'd just like to say that we are incredibly powerful, and we get more powerful. We just have to let ourselves. So do not buy into what society says, because usually what it says is rubbish.
Yeah. I 100%
Get off
agree.
that socials.
Oh, yes, I know. It's the biggest time suck and energy suck going, isn't it? But still I sit there scrolling.
And it gives you that terrible comparison that's just so damaging and so corrosive.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Remembering the Insta lens that everybody puts on the things that they post on socials. So, Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate having you, particularly since you're joining me from the other side of the world. But I always enjoy chatting with you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and insights into turning 50 and the excitement and what you're looking forward to the next decade and what that might bring.
Yeah, and to all your listeners, just enjoy.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining me for today's episode of A Hidden World of Women, a podcast brought to you by Women's Health and Wellbeing Services. For more information on the services we offer, head to whws.org.au or Women's Health and Wellbeing Services on YouTube and social media. Looking forward to the next episode where we uncover the hidden world of women.